everywhere. But I think it's worth discussing. Outside of Cal, who is Stanford's biggest rival? Obviously, big game's the biggest, but who else up there really gets that Cardinal blood boiling on that schedule? And who do you want to see on that 2020 slate out of the South?
If we're going, who's the second best? I'm honestly going to go to USC. I'm going to honestly call them a 1B. And I don't even think there's that much between them and Cal right now. Because for so many years, Stanford's biggest rival was USC. The big game was important because that's the only game that students showed up for. But the game that actually mattered on the schedule was the game against USC. A lot of times it was before even school started. But that was the game that determined how Stanford seasons was going to shake out because that game was so important. This is a game that has been going on since the 1800s. It is a game that is incredibly important both historically and in the recent. Since 1999, Stanford has gone 12-11, despite absolutely sucking for the entire history. And honestly, if you talk to people at Stanford, they'll say that Cal is rival number 1, Stanford 1A, maybe 1B.
I wish we could disagree here because, there's just nothing I enjoy more than disagreeing with you on a Monday night. But you're so right. It is USC. And I got to say, from a personal standpoint, I hate USC at least as much as Cal, if not more. And I was thinking about it today. If you have a bougie spectrum, it's like USC and Cal are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and Stanford's right down the middle. You got USC, which is the ultimate Hollywood bougie. You got Cal, which is grungy Berkeley, and I know you're a Berkeley lover. I'm a Berkeley hater, but it's got its charm. And then right in the middle is Stanford. Got a little bit of both. Obviously, some people would say it's all bougie, but if you just look at the politics of the place, if you know what I'm saying, it's somewhere in the middle of those two. And both of those extremes are terrible. I can't take it. And USC, they always just roll up. They park their RVs. They bring in their swarms of Trojan fans, and they take over Stanford Stadium in a way that even Cal can't do from across the bay. And it's humiliating and it's frustrating because they show up at our tailgates and drink all our beer. And you have to put up with USC personalities. No offense, Sam. I know you're listening in the background. You have to put up with USC personalities for an entire day. And that's just a really hard way to spend a Saturday. And I think, that's probably still going to happen this year. I think if there's one Pac-12 South, Pac-12 North game that you maintain across the entire Pac-12 slate, it has to be USC-Stanford. And it would be a shame if that game's not played. But the only pro would be not having to put up with USC people for a day.
And then if we look about probably the most meaningful game in Stanford's 21st century, it was probably that game against USC in 2007, where they came in as 41-point underdogs and with Tavita Pritchard at the helm, somehow pulled it out. So on top of all those other things, which I don't know how you're going to tell me RVs and bougie in the same little sentence there, but I get your point broadly. It's a frustrating rivalry, I think, for sure. And a really good one, and one I really hope they're going to keep, because I wrote about it this week for Sports Pac-12. But Stanford has played both USC and UCLA every year, both of them, since 1945. And honestly, going to be a true shame if that doesn't occur this year.
There's still a chance. If you think about it, that last game of the season is going to be a seeded game. I think it's fairly likely that Stanford is closer to UCLA's level than USC's level this season. But if UCLA is, say, a mid-tier Pac-12 North team, then UCLA and Stanford can play as those mid-tier Pac-12 North, mid-tier Pac-12 South teams in that seeded game, which, by the way, I think is a fantastic idea. Clearly, once again, the Pac-12 as the biggest follower in the history of followers was just copying the Big Ten. But it's a good idea and one worth taking over because, even moving forward, it's great to see more than just conference championship games in conference championship weekend. And I think that may be something we're headed for. But by the way, the RV point, I just got to defend myself. I was moving in early sophomore year and trying to use the parking lot outside Castaño, great dorm. And there were like multiple USC RVs that just rolled up and parked in that parking lot for the entire weekend. And, made it very difficult for me to move in my stuff. And they were annoying. They were, making lots of racket at all hours of the night. I mean, how am I supposed to put up with that? I'm just a very, very no. Okay, we're not going to get into it anymore. But I think that it's very safe to say that USC is the second biggest rival to Stanford behind Cal. But I will say, I think it's always been Oregon, Washington that Stanford's really most directly competing with in the Pac-12 North. And yet right now, I think, as I said earlier, it's Oregon State, Washington State that Stanford's really playing in the same pool with right now. That's their sandbox. They got to get out of that sandbox and get back into the big boy sandbox. But first, they got to prove that they can do it by manhandling that Wazoo OSU combo and going on to maybe beat some of the big boys too.
Well, I really do feel like you already read my column because I had Oregon and Washington right up next after USC. But they're not in that sandbox. They're not in that kitty box. People have read way too much into that 4-8 season, and you're doing it too right now. And it's honestly a little bit frustrating, King, because you're better than this. You're better than this. They were not a 4-8 team last year. You can't tell me that. They had so many injuries. They did not play like a 4-8 team when they were at their healthiest. Their healthiest was that game against Arizona, and they looked like they could compete with anyone in the Pac-12. That was the one game that KJ was healthy, and he was a beast. He was nothing short of a beast. He won that game. That was on homecoming. It was like, wow, this is what Stanford football could be. And that's what they are, because they're not going to have those injuries again, because no one can have those injuries again. That was an insane coupling of injuries that had to go wrong for them to be that bad last year. It's not going to happen again. So in the future, we're going to see them as a decent team to a great team. And that's what I expect this year. But I want to go talk about that Oregon rivalry a little bit because it is next, and it's pretty interesting. Last 10 meetings, 5-5, not in a kitty box there. And they had that great win in 2018 with College Game Day. Also had a College Game Day loss in 2011. This is a game that's nationally important. In 7 of the 9 years, one of the two teams has represented the Pac-12 in the championship game. An important game for sure.
The great point on the 2018 season and specifically that win over Oregon with College Game Day. But the pendulum between 8-4 and 4-8 is not that big. I think in 2018, Stanford very well could have been a 6-6 team, and last year they probably should have been a 6-6 team. I actually think that 2018 and 2019 season were much closer than people give it credit for. 2018, Stanford was lucky to get some of those wins. Oregon is the biggest case in point of all time. That was one of the luckiest victories that Stanford has ever had as a program. Of course, they had to go out and make the plays, but Oregon also handed it to them with mistakes down the stretch. KJ Casillo played fantastic, but the defense was getting absolutely torched until really Justin Herbert was both his own greatest advocate and greatest enemy. And we'll see if that plays out in the NFL. But Stanford was not that close, was not that far from losing multiple other games that season, and they really were just a quintessential 8-4 team. Good, able to beat the teams that they're better than, but not good enough to beat national contenders. And I think last season, Stanford just got unlucky in those same games in which they got lucky a season before. And that kind of dynamic is really all the difference between 4-8 and 8-4 in a power conference. So I agree with you. Stanford is not a 4-8 type program, but they're going to have to do something for me to prove that they're more than, say, a 6-6, 8-4 type program. And in a Pac-12 only schedule, 6-game Pac-12 only schedule, getting to 4-2 I think would be a big, big accomplishment for this Stanford roster.